What's happening, Blue Jays fans? You're tuned into Jays Central, and today we need to talk about a significant development that just shook up the off-season landscape. Before we dive deep into what this means for Toronto moving forward, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. It takes literally 1 second, and it makes a massive difference in helping this channel reach more passionate Blue Jays fans just like you. Also, make sure you stick around until the end because we're going to break down every implication of this news, and I guarantee you'll want to hear the full analysis. So here's what just went down. A premier starting pitcher who'd been sitting on the free agent market finally found his new home, and it's not with the Blue Jays. This left-hander signed a 3-year deal worth $115 million with a division rival in the American League Central. The contract came together quickly after weeks of the market seemingly stalling out, catching many observers by surprise with both the destination and the financial terms. Now, Toronto had been connected to this pitcher through credible reporting just days before the signing became official. Multiple insiders indicated the Blue Jays had genuine interest and were exploring what it would take to bring him north of the border. That interest wasn't just casual tire kicking. These were serious discussions about fit, role, and financial commitment. For a brief moment, it seemed like Toronto might be preparing to make another major splash. The fact that the deal ultimately went elsewhere raises important questions about the Blue Jays' approach to the remainder of the offseason. Are they still aggressively pursuing upgrades, or have they shifted into a more conservative mode? Does missing out on this pitcher signal the end of their major acquisition phase, or will they pivot to alternative targets? These are the questions we need to explore in depth today. Let me provide some context about Toronto's winter activity up to this point. The organization has been incredibly busy, making multiple significant additions across different areas of the roster. This wasn't a quiet offseason where the front office sat back and hoped internal development would carry the day. They identified needs, targeted specific players, and made aggressive moves to address those needs. That proactive approach deserves recognition. The headliner of their offseason remains the ace-level starter they acquired on a 7-year deal worth over $200 million. That transaction sent shockwaves through baseball, immediately elevating Toronto's rotation from good to potentially elite. When you land that caliber of arm, you're making a statement about organizational intentions. This team is built to win championships right now, not 3 years from now. Beyond that marquee signing, the Blue Jays added multiple complementary pieces that strengthened the overall roster construction. They brought in a power-hitting third baseman from international markets on a multi-year deal. They secured bullpen depth with experienced relievers who've pitched in high-leverage situations. They added rotation depth that can either start or provide length out of the bullpen, depending on needs. These aren't headline-grabbing moves, but they're the kind of smart acquisitions that separate good teams from great ones. Before we continue, drop a comment right now telling me your honest assessment of Toronto's offseason so far. Are you satisfied with the moves they've made? Disappointed they didn't land this latest pitcher? Somewhere in between? I genuinely want to hear from the Jays Central community about how you're feeling. The Blue Jays also made a key trade to bolster their bullpen, acquiring a young reliever with promising stuff from another organization. These under-the-radar moves often get overlooked in favor of splashy free agent signings, but they're equally important for roster construction. Building organizational depth requires identifying value wherever it exists, whether that's in free agency or through the trade market. There was also the reunion with a designated hitter who'd previously spent time in Toronto. While he's on a minor league deal with no guarantees, his presence in spring training provides veteran competition and a familiar face who understands the organization. These low-risk moves create camp battles that elevate everyone's performance while providing insurance if unexpected situations arise. Looking at the totality of Toronto's off-season moves, you see a clear pattern: aggressive roster building aimed at championship contention. The financial commitments have been substantial, the positional upgrades have been meaningful, and the organizational depth has improved significantly. This wasn't a half-hearted attempt at incremental improvement. The Blue Jays went all in on constructing a roster capable of competing with elite organizations. However, it's also true that Toronto has experienced some disappointment along the way. They pursued a star outfielder aggressively during the free agent period, but ultimately lost out when he chose to sign with their biggest rival. That stung, both because of the player's talent and because of where he ended up. Watching a premium bat land with a team you're competing against is never fun for fans or front offices. Now comes this latest development where another target signs elsewhere. When you string together multiple misses on high-profile players, it's natural to wonder whether the Blue Jays are losing their competitive edge in free agency. Are players viewing Toronto as a less desirable destination? Is the organization unwilling to meet market prices? Or is this simply the reality that not every pursuit ends successfully? Let's examine what missing out on this pitcher might actually indicate about Toronto's strategy moving forward. The most straightforward interpretation is that the Blue Jays have essentially concluded their major offseason business. They've made their significant additions, addressed their primary needs, and are now comfortable heading into spring training with the roster as currently constructed. That's not a failure. It's a decision point that every organization reaches. Consider the financial commitments Toronto has already made this winter. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars distributed across multiple contracts for players expected to contribute immediately. At some point, even organizations with substantial resources need to draw a line and say we've invested enough for this cycle. Unlimited spending might work in fantasy baseball, but real-world budgets and luxury tax considerations create constraints that management must navigate. There's also the question of diminishing returns. Adding a sixth or seventh quality starting pitcher to a rotation that already features multiple strong arms provides less marginal value than the first or second addition. Toronto has assembled legitimate rotation depth with their current group, and piling on another expensive arm might not move the championship odds needle significantly enough to justify the investment. Let's talk specifically about the starting pitching depth Toronto currently possesses, because this is where the decision not to pursue this latest free agent more aggressively starts making sense. The rotation features an ace-level arm at the top who can match up against anyone in baseball. Behind him, there are multiple pitchers with track records of success and the ability to give quality innings. This isn't a rotation built on hope and potential. It's constructed with proven major league performers. The second starter in the rotation brings veteran consistency and durability. He's logged multiple seasons as a reliable middle-of-the-rotation arm who keeps his team in games. You won't find him dominating headlines, but you'll find him giving you 30 starts and limiting damage. That consistency is invaluable over a 162-game marathon where every fifth day matters. The third rotation spot features a pitcher returning from injury who, when healthy, has performed at an elite level. There's inherent risk anytime you're counting on someone coming back from significant health issues, but the upside is tremendous. If he returns to form, Toronto has tremendous value locked in at a reasonable price point. If the comeback doesn't materialize as hoped, they have depth to absorb that disappointment. Make sure you've smashed that like button if you're enjoying this breakdown. And drop a comment telling me which of Toronto's current starting pitchers you're most confident in heading into the new season. Who do you think will be the most reliable arm in this rotation? The fourth and fifth rotation spots are filled by a combination of veteran stability and young talent with upside. One brings experience and know-how accumulated over multiple major league seasons. The other represents the future, a young arm with electric stuff who flashed brilliance in limited action last season. That blend of experience and youth creates balance that successful rotations typically feature. Beyond those 5 expected starters, Toronto has additional arms who could step into the rotation if needed. There are swingmen who can provide length and quality innings whether starting or relieving. There are young pitchers knocking on the door, ready to seize opportunities if they arise. This organizational depth is what allows teams to weather the inevitable storms that every season brings. When you evaluate this collection of arms objectively, it's genuinely difficult to argue that Toronto desperately needed to add the free agent pitcher who just signed elsewhere. Would he have made them better? Potentially, depending on how you value different pitcher profiles. But would he have been the difference between championship and disappointment? That's a much harder case to make given the existing depth. Independent projection systems and analytical evaluations back up this assessment. Toronto's starting pitching depth ranks in the top third of all major league organizations according to respected metrics. That's not homer optimism or biased evaluation. It's data-driven analysis suggesting this rotation can compete with anyone when healthy and performing to capability. The real question isn't whether Toronto needs more starting pitching. It's whether their resources would be better allocated addressing other roster areas. Every dollar spent on starting pitching is a dollar that can't be invested in offensive upgrades, bullpen depth, or defensive improvements. Smart organizations think holistically about roster construction rather than obsessing over any single position group. Speaking of alternative areas to address, the bullpen presents an interesting opportunity for Toronto to make incremental improvements without breaking the bank. Relief pitching depth currently grades out as middle of the pack according to analytical evaluations. That's not terrible, but it's also not championship caliber when you look at recent World Series winners and their bullpen construction. Adding one or two quality relievers who can handle high-leverage situations would provide more marginal value at this point than stacking another starter into an already deep rotation. The financial commitment would be significantly less than pursuing premium starting pitching, and the impact on close games could be substantial. This is where smart front offices pivot as markets develop and opportunities emerge. Now let's talk about potential next steps for the Blue Jays as we head towards spring training. Just because they didn't land this latest free agent doesn't mean roster construction is completely finished. There are still moves to be made, strategies to explore, and opportunities to seize if the right situations present themselves. The key is being opportunistic rather than desperate, calculated rather than reactive. One possibility is pivoting to more affordable starting pitching options who can provide organizational depth without requiring massive financial commitments. There are veteran pitchers still available on the free agent market who could sign minor league deals with spring training invitations. These low-risk additions create competition, provide insurance against injuries, and occasionally turn into valuable contributors if everything breaks right. Two specific names have been mentioned in various reports as potential fits for teams looking to add rotation depth without major investment. Both bring significant major league experience and have pitched at high levels during their careers. Neither will command the massive contracts that frontline starters receive, but both could provide real value on short-term, team-friendly deals. Toronto could absolutely explore these options as camp depth additions. There's also the intriguing possibility of a reunion with a former Blue Jays starter who pitched for Toronto in recent seasons. This veteran knows the organization, has established relationships with players and coaches, and demonstrated the ability to contribute in their system. Familiarity eliminates learning curves and allows for immediate integration if a deal comes together. Sometimes the best additions are the ones who've already proven they can succeed in your environment. Additionally, the legendary 41-year-old pitcher we've discussed in previous videos remains unsigned and potentially available. His recent playoff performance demonstrated he can still pitch at a high level in critical situations. If Toronto wants to add a veteran presence who brings championship pedigree and mentorship value, that option remains on the table depending on mutual interest and financial alignment. Before we go further, hit that like button if you haven't already. And drop a comment telling me which direction you think Toronto should go from here. Should they stand pat with their current roster? Add bullpen depth? Take a flyer on veteran starting pitching? I want to hear what the Jays Central community thinks. The bullpen improvement strategy deserves serious consideration at this stage of the offseason. Relief pitching markets tend to develop later than starting pitching markets, with quality options often available at reasonable prices as spring training approaches. Teams that have already secured their rotation pieces can shift focus to bullpen construction without feeling rushed or pressured into overpaying. Toronto's current relief core features some quality arms, but lacks the overwhelming depth that championship bullpens typically possess. Adding a left-handed specialist who can retire tough matchups in the 7th and 8th innings would provide tactical flexibility that's currently missing. Finding a right-handed power arm who can pitch in multiple innings with strikeout stuff would give the manager more late-game options. These bullpen additions don't need to be marquee, names commanding massive annual salaries. Often the most effective relievers are relatively unknown players who excel in specific roles within well-constructed bullpens. Toronto's front office has demonstrated the ability to identify these types of contributors, and continuing that approach makes sense given where the roster currently stands. There's also the internal development angle that shouldn't be overlooked. The Blue Jays have young relievers in their system who could push for major league opportunities with strong spring performances. Creating competition for bullpen spots elevates everyone's preparation and ensures that only the most deserving arms make the opening day roster. That meritocratic approach builds organizational depth while maintaining high performance standards. The designated hitter and bench construction presents another area where Toronto could make moves without huge financial commitments. Adding versatile position players who can provide quality at-bats in pinch-hit situations or spell regulars for rest days improves roster flexibility. These aren't glamorous additions that generate headlines, but they're the kind of smart depth moves that pay dividends over long seasons. One key consideration as we evaluate Toronto's offseason is comparing their current roster construction to the team that just advanced deep into the playoffs. Have they gotten better, worse, or stayed relatively the same? The loss of their shortstop is significant, but the addition of the ace-level starter and power-hitting third baseman arguably provides more overall value. The complementary additions throughout the roster suggest they've maintained or slightly improved their championship odds. It's also worth acknowledging that standing pat isn't necessarily a negative outcome. If Toronto believes their current roster gives them the best chance to win a championship, why force additional moves that create redundancy or allocate resources inefficiently? Confidence in your current group is perfectly valid when that group has demonstrated championship-caliber ability. The competitive landscape across the American League also factors into this evaluation. While other teams have made moves, Toronto hasn't fallen behind in any meaningful way. Their rotation still matches up favorably against division rivals. Their offensive firepower remains elite when healthy. Their defensive alignment has actually improved with some of the positional adjustments made this winter. My final take on this entire situation: missing out on this latest free agent pitcher is not a catastrophic failure that undermines Toronto's championship aspirations. It's simply the reality that not every pursuit ends successfully, and smart organizations adapt their strategies based on how markets develop. The Blue Jays have assembled a championship-caliber roster through their various additions, and they don't need to force additional moves just to generate headlines. What matters now is spring training performance, health maintenance, and the regular season execution. The roster is constructed to compete at the highest level. The financial commitments have been made. The organizational depth has been built. Now it's time for players to go out and perform to their capabilities. If they do that, Toronto will be right back in championship contention regardless of which free agents they didn't sign. The offseason has one clear narrative. The Blue Jays went all in on building a championship roster, and they largely succeeded in that objective. A few misses along the way don't change the overall success of their approach. As we head towards spring training and the start of a new season, Toronto fans should feel optimistic about their team's chances to compete for a title. All right, Blue Jays Nation, that's the complete breakdown of what this latest free agent signing means for Toronto's offseason strategy. Before you go, 3 critical things. First, smash that like button if this analysis provided value. It genuinely makes a difference for the channel's growth. Second, subscribe to Jays Central if you want comprehensive Blue Jays coverage throughout the entire season. Third, and most important, drop a comment with your honest take. Are you satisfied with how Toronto's offseason has unfolded, or are you disappointed they didn't make more moves? I read every single comment, and I love engaging with this passionate community. Thanks for watching Jays Central, and let's go Blue Jays.